morning, everyone, and welcome back to a Coffee with Francesca and Traci. Again, we're joined by Professor Shahla and Moderato, and today we are thinking that we might talk a little bit about how we teach critical thinking and clinical decision-making in the alternative platforms that we're all using for our instruction now. We're not meeting with our students face-to-face. We're using virtual platforms like Zoom or Skype or other sorts of online platforms. How do we replicate and help the students to achieve the same competencies that we are so fluent at being able to teach in our face-to-face environments now?
Thank you, Traci, because you know that I need this conversation for my PhD. So I love to listen to your opinion, how to teach clinical reasoning and how to measure.
Well, and also Dr. Shahla is going to be teaching in the master's starting this coming Monday, and she's facing many of these challenges immediately then in terms of how we overcome these. So,
Well, I think that the core of your question could be, how can I teach case conceptualization to my students? This, I think, is the basic question. And for many people, case conceptualization is something like confused. It's like embedded in the process of therapeutic alliance. It's part of a therapeutic alliance. But case formulation or case conceptualization, and I will ask you if you make a difference between case formulation and case conceptualization. In some way, I do it. Case formulation is the scientific behavior analytic approach to diagnosis, and it goes beyond diagnosis. So, for example, in clinical behavioral analysis, now the trend is to skip the classical nosographic approach to diagnosis, to go through a transdiagnostic process to identify some basic processes that are shared by different disease. This is, for example, what happens in ACT. And ACT, as you know, has a strong behavioral analytic roots, especially in Steve Hayes, in Kelly Wilson, and all the people who comes from the behavioral analytic field. So this could be a starting point, case formulation, case conceptualization, what kind of case formulation choose. And my point of view is it depends on the level you choose to address. You can have different levels. You can have the level, for example, a middle level like Hexaflex in ACT. Or you can have a higher level, wider but less precise, like the 4 Ps. But the basic in all this is functional analysis, the basic, the cells of the body. Does it make sense?
Yes, but if you have four students, and you make a usual presentation about how to make a perfect functional assessment, I think these four students will be really different when they will make the first assessment. They will think different things and maybe create different intervention for children.
For children, for the adults.
Yes, for the family. So my question is, how can we measure the ability to create a program not only for the child, not only for the family, a complex program, and to teach how to think about the problem? Can we teach this kind?
I think this is a major problem in behavioral analysis, because behavioral analysis is, in my humble opinion, too focused on procedures instead of processes. So procedures are important, of course, but procedures without the support of the analysis of processes can be mechanically, can be risky, can be approached in a mechanical way as opposed of contextualistic way.
Yes. Absolutely. It's a balance between being able to teach a great number of people how to do something in a very short period of time, running the risk of teaching this protocol that then is applied without consideration of the context, without the individualization, without the analysis of the variables that are important related to its effectiveness. And this is I think you guys are pointing to a very important consideration for the discipline of behavior analysis, particularly applied behavior analysis, as we move forward.
And I think I want to add two things. One, very quickly, about something that Paolo said that I think is important for everybody to understand and hear. When Paolo said, and you should add to this, Paolo, but that when you say functional analysis, what you mean is functional analysis in the most profound sense, not a particular methodology for difficult behavior. Not that it wouldn't include addressing difficult behavior, but when you say functional analysis, you mean sort of the fundamentals of our discipline in terms of understanding the processes of behavior and behavior change. And I think that's critical for the conversation to understand that. I think the other thing, and it's interesting, I was having this conversation with a colleague the other day, is the words case conceptualization, case formulation come primarily from psychology, and then I think there are behavior analysts who are starting or have done, like Dr. Moderato, very good work with it from a behavior analytic worldview or lens as how you look at that process. I think the other thing, though, because I actually came in through developmental psychology and early childhood, and there were different words to describe that, and had different experiences in my training as a behavior analyst or a behavior scientist. But I think fundamentally, what Traci said, I think, is part of why the tension arises, and part of why we are addressing it and need to address it is we want this to serve more than just one group of children, people, families. We want to be able to have a system, and a system requires some formulation of the process of how we're approaching it. So regardless of the individual words, I think that we are at a time in our discipline where we have to develop what are the parameters when we approach any behavior change in an applied or meaningful context. And I think that one thing I would encourage you that made me think is you should have Professor Angeliki Gina. She's at the University of Athens. You should have her come talk about what she calls systemic behavior analysis, which I think fits in with the contextual work that you all are doing in Italy, and that I find actually more advanced in some ways than what I'm seeing here oftentimes. And I think part of it is because there's a very profound determination to work on something that's a valued outcome. So there's a focus on having a valued and meaningful outcome, and at the same time not being too focused on the procedures and being more focused on what are the processes, what do we understand about the mechanisms of behavior change, and how can we work with individuals and what is meaningful for them in their systems, in their context, to produce change. And I want to give you a metaphor that I have found, I don't know if it's a good one, but it's one that I find helpful, is it's sort of the difference between loving your hammer and nails and loving creating a beautiful house. If it's loving creating a beautiful house, then you use your principles of physics, of chemistry, of all the sciences to construct a beautiful home, of art, all of it. And the same thing when we are trying to help construct a new or an improved reality for the people we're working with, we should focus on that and then use our science to help us do that. Not be so obsessed with one part of a procedure that we want to go prove that that does something, that we lose sight of the beautiful house. I don't know if that's a good metaphor or not, but
it's a good metaphor.
But I think there's something there.
And
you made two very good points. I will use it. The first is you say that, and I say the same. Many people many students in our courses have a narrow vision of functional analysis, just as a tool for identifying how to control problem behavior. It's not. It's much more. I use the metaphor of the cells. The cells are the unit of every part of our body, of an organ, of a system, of everything. And functional analysis is, in some way, is a principle, is a procedure, but is a principle, because basically describes the relations that happens in the world, not in the narrow room of. And the second, when you say case formulation, case conceptualization, is prediction and control. Is a theory of the disease of your client. It's prediction and control. In our view, in a psychoanalysis, every stream, every model in psychology have or should have a case formulation, including psychoanalysis. But in our case formulation, the concept is prediction and control.
I want to make a parenthesis in this conversation, because I think one thing that I really like working across languages is that terms are important, but I think what happens when you don't have one common language is you spend time trying to understand what's under the term. And this is one of the things I think is important about these kind of interactions, is because we're trying to get at what we mean by things, but we're also not attacking each other or getting too caught up in the actual words. It's like we understand there are different ways of talking about things, and what's important is what's underneath it. So that's my parentheses, that I actually think that's a very important thing about these dialogues. Anyway, good point, Paolo.
And
now listen to Francesca.
My question is,
No, you have we have a question for you.
Wait, okay, I listen your question.
No, you have to give an answer.
Okay, I have to give an answer.
You are writing your dissertation.
Right, so. You're taking the second PhD, so we await your answer.
And I could be an external discussant of your.
You already would. So in my review, as I told you before, I found only 8 papers about how to teach case conceptualization to psychologists, and 200 paper in medical and other field. So I was really surprised, because I think that in our field we need many more publication about this topic. And the best factor to produce good critical thinking and good clinical reasoning is the interaction between students after simulation or case presentation. So the teacher presents something, or a podcast or a video or something from a patient, and then he tried to promote discussion in the group.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a perfect simulation, but without discussion, no growing up in critical thinking. So that's the measure in the 8th paper I found. So
well, yeah, and I think that comes right back to the points that Shahla and Paolo were making with respect to engaging in functional analysis in the broader, truer sense, is that if you just are told something, right? Like if I just tell you a story, if I just give you a narrative about here's a case that I worked on, and here are the decisions that I made, and this was the outcome. There's no interaction, there's no dialogue, there's no questioning. It's me basically telling you a set of rules that applied in this situation, and part of it is how good I am at providing the context and the narrative, about articulating the critical contingencies that were of relevance and importance in producing that particular outcome. But my version of telling it, my way of telling it, and even the points that I bring into my narrative may not be the ones that resonate with the students. They may not necessarily help the students to see the systemic contingencies that were in effect. The words that I choose may not have the same meanings or translations, whether it's English to Italian or just one way of talking about something in psychology or behavior analysis as opposed to another. And so that interaction, that dialogue, that question and answering, I think is very important.
And modeling.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the things I'll talk about on Monday is that because we've grown so fast as a field, there are a lot of novice performers and not a lot of expert performers. And we need more modeling of not only the expert performers, but the expert performers interacting with one another. Because like we all have done a lot of clinical work, but even each of us can learn from one another. If we were presented with a case or a set of circumstances, we would all, I think, the combination of the discussion between all of us would produce some new things that would benefit that child or that adult that we're working with. So it's also important to have the interaction at those levels so we can learn from one another.
As you say that, I was just reflecting because I take notes when we're talking. I'm writing things down that I want to come back to and think about and talk more about. Having the coffee is wonderful, but it's so short too.
Yeah. So I
Francesca.
promise I will send you my my review after this coffee, because you need to read.
Francesca, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You mentioned 8 papers on this topic, correct?
From 2015.
Okay, I'm not surprised, because we are talking about something immaterial as opposed to things for nurses or for doctors that are material. But my question is, are these 8 papers from the same field or from different fields?
Every 8 from different field, except for 2 with PBL, problem-based learning. 2 are based, use the same the same method to teach critical thinking. The other are different. No one from behavior analysis, from cognitive. They are different files, but not cognitive or behavioral.
Let's keep in mind that psychology is a non-unified science. So 8. I'm happy that only 8 different. You know, it's not a joke. In Italy, some years ago, a colleague of ours made a survey of the different models in psychology and psychotherapy, and he found 600 different schools of psychology and psychotherapy. 600.
600 type of coffee in Italy, because we can have.
I prefer 600 kind of coffee.
Hey, my friends, we have to stop. We can only put 20 minutes on the web, so we have to say hello to the next meeting. Thank you very much to everybody. See you on Monday.
See you on Monday. Bye. Ciao.
Bye. Ciao. Ciao.
Ciao.